Dear church, let's talk about brotherhood news with Bobby Ross. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley, and I've got a special guest with me today, my good friend Bobby Ross. He is the editor-in-chief of the Christian Chronicle. He is the Christian Chronicle in my mind. He's got so many good things going with the Chronicle, has really kind of shaped and molded it into something that I've really enjoyed seeing. I love the direction you're going with this, and I think the stories you're covering are very relevant for our times, and I'm just very, very thankful for what you're doing. And I wanted to have you come on to just kind of promote the Chronicle, but also just to talk about some things in the life of an editor of a paper like the Christian Chronicle. Bobby, before we jump in, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, one thing I think you and I line up pretty well on everything except for baseball. I grew up in Cardinal country, huge Cardinals fan, and I know you are not. You are a Texas Rangers fan, so let's get that out of the way. We'll just have to agree to disagree on that one. Tell us about yourself before we go forward.
Well, I didn't realize it was a Cardinals fan when I accepted this invitation. So, I mean, Cardinals and Astros fans, I don't do that.
I understand.
I guess I've grown up all my life in Churches of Christ. My dad was in the Air Force, and then he was a preacher. And I lived in 6 or so southern states growing up, and we've always been real involved with the church. Dad went to preaching school, then he preached, and then Mom and Dad were house parents at a Christian children's home. And so we kind of ended up going to college, majored in journalism, spent about 15 years in secular journalism, working a lot of those years with the Oklahoman, which is the daily newspaper here in Oklahoma City. Worked at the Associated Press in Nashville and Dallas for about 3 years before I went to work at the Chronicle. And I've been at the Chronicle about 15 years now. So I've kind of been full-time journalism for 30 years and just hit the halfway mark of that time being at the Chronicle. So it's kind of, in some ways, it's crazy to think it's been that long at the Chronicle.
That is crazy. So I didn't realize that either. Bobby, what, in all that time, what have you seen is the biggest difference between secular news and, working for a secular newspaper and working with the Chronicle? What do you think is the biggest difference in those two?
Yeah, I think most of what we do is pretty similar. I mean, a lot of journalism, to me, the best journalism is trying to talk to people and tell stories and help bring understanding and help make difficult issues maybe a little simpler to people, maybe help debates come to life. So a lot of that is the same. Probably the biggest difference is just the worldview that we bring to it, the goal that we bring to it. I mean, when I was in secular news, getting the stories and getting them right has always been a go. But I don't know that we have a tagline, real news that honors God, and one of our mission statement is to inform, inspire, and unite Churches of Christ. So I think maybe I'm not doing a great job of explaining it, but just the Christian nature of it, and trying to bring what we feel. We feel like journalism is a noble profession when done right. So we're trying to bring the best brand of journalism to a Christian environment in a way that brings Churches of Christ together and tells good news, bad news, inspiring news, things we need to work on. I'm rambling now, but that's kind of how we approach that.
No, that was my next question is, what is the aim of the Chronicle? And you answered that is, you're trying to tell the stories, you're trying to unite, you're trying to shed light on, because, I mean, we are not unlike a lot of different, churches, and in that we have our differences among the brotherhood. There are things that we divide on as well as things that we unite on. And I know the Chronicle has not shied away from that. You guys have, exposed some of those differences, and, talk a little bit about that. Is that difficult? Because I think, we're kind of a people, we expect you to land on some place and you're just reporting. So talk about the difficulty of that and trying to, report the news without coming across as liberal or conservative or whatever.
Right. Well, our goal with the Chronicle is to try as hard as we can to go as far I hate the right and left terminology, but just for the sake of this conversation, to go as far right and as far left as we can within the fellowship of churches of Christ, and to report as fairly and fully as we can
Sure.
on churches of Christ. And that is difficult in a lot of cases, because we do have a lot of things that we disagree on. And I think sometimes we even, Flavel Yakeley was a church growth expert who's died within the last year at Harding, but one of his things was people in alike groups tend to see the differences among themselves, whereas somebody from the outside might look and say, hey, those people are so much alike. 95% of how they worship and how they read the Bible and how they do things is just alike. Whereas if you're in churches of Christ, we kind of every little thing, and it's important doctrinal things, and some
Sure.
of it we have to have distinctions. But I think, and I hope I'm going the right direction on the question.
Absolutely.
But just kind of, what I've seen is, obviously with the Chronicle, I go to a lot of churches that, from the polishing the pulpit to the Abilene Christian Lectureship or
Sure.
Summit there where you're at in Abilene, and you would see different views of the world maybe, and a different approach to churches of Christ. But a lot of the basic beliefs and the basic ways of worship and reading the Bible would still be the same, even across what in our fellowship might seem to be a big gulf to some people.
Sure.
So we're trying to report on that, and trying to, on one hand, we don't tend to try to emphasize things that divide us if there's not a reason to do that.
Yeah.
If I go to a church to write a story on a church that has a great food pantry and is feeding a lot of hungry people,
Yeah.
and they have a praise team,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go out of my way in the story I write to say, and oh, by the way, they have a praise team, so you may or may not like this
Exactly.
church. And that's kind of one of the lesser examples, but we don't emphasize things like that. But at the same time, if there's a debate about instrumental music or proper worship, then we will kind of get into some of those issues and try to do that in a way where we're fair to all perspectives. Yeah. And we're not because we don't, like there's a handful of us working with the Chronicle. So, some people want us to take a stand on various controversial things. And our position is always, do you really want the 5 people who aren't any smarter than us to be the ones to tell everybody else what is the right way, the only way to do things? So
exactly.
we try to be fair, and we try to cast a light on things, but we do tell people we're a newspaper and not a viewspaper, although we have editorials and we take stands. This month we have an editorial that racism is a sin, because, there are certain things where we feel like we have to speak out, but then there are other things where we feel like we're not in a position to be taking sides, or even be telling people who've spent as much time studying the Bible as we have who's come to the right conclusion, if that makes any sense.
Makes perfect sense. And I think what you said there was really interesting. You said, we're a newspaper, not a viewspaper. And I think if people, understand that we're reporting news, and that's what journalism is. You're reporting news. Now, journalism is getting a bad rap in our nation right now, but still there are some credible, honorable journalists out there trying to do the right thing. And I believe you're one of those that's just reporting the news. And so, like you said, with a small handful of folks there, why do you feel like that you are the purveyors of that truth? I think that's a very good point for people to pay attention to. And, talk a little bit about how difficult it has been to do journalism during the pandemic, especially with the Christian Chronicle, where you rely so heavily on donations and things of that nature. Talk a little bit about that, because I know it's been a little bit of a struggle.
Yeah, it's been really different because, I mentioned I've been at the Chronicle for 15 years. And one of the things I've absolutely loved about being at the Chronicle is having the opportunity to actually go where the news is, and to go meet so many Christians. I've been to all 50 states. I've been to 15 countries
Wow.
the Chronicle. So a lot of travel, and that's just been, I've really enjoyed that. And
Yeah.
so, and now I'm on 16 straight Sundays of doing church at home and not traveling anywhere. And, we're doing this interview. I'm sitting in my kitchen, but, because we're still not working
Yes.
in the office. So it's different to try. My wife has autoimmune diseases, so we're trying to be real careful
Sure.
about anything like that. But it is different to try to cover the pandemic. But it's obviously it's challenging because you going somewhere in person, you're going to see it, you're going to smell it, you're going to touch it, you're going to get a better story in some ways than doing it like on a feed like this where we're connected via video.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's been amazing. We've done the George Floyd death in police custody on May 25th. We're about a month outside of that, and have done a lot of coverage on racial issues in the church.
Yeah.
And a couple of days after that, I was able to get several African American ministers from across the country, a civil rights reporter, Jerry Mitchell, who's done so much work on old civil rights murder cases, and we were able to get everybody together on Zoom and kind of had this great conversation with about 6 or 7 experts live that we then were able to put on YouTube, which is
Wow.
the amazing thing is we never would have thought of doing something like that
Sure.
before this pandemic. And now suddenly it's like there's a new way of communicating. And we've had some other discussions like that where I don't know, it's almost like God is giving us new ways to communicate and new ways to have dialogue, even in the middle of something like this where we can barely leave our houses.
Yeah, that's kind of opened some doors that you previously probably wouldn't even noticed because of all this.
Right.
That's really interesting. Your position is unique in that you work for, a Christian newspaper, and you being a Christian yourself. Can you think of some stories that impacted your own personal faith in a way that you never expected? Like any stories that you've covered where after covering them or in the process, I should say, of covering them, you walk away a stronger Christian? Do you have any examples of those? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, I'm just trying to think. I mean, I'm always, I guess and I'm one of these people that the last story I've done is usually my favorite story.
Right,
So it's hard to think back, but I think about, the last actual reporting I did outside of my house before this pandemic was after the tornadoes hit Nashville and Cookeville, Tennessee, and kind of really bad tornadoes. So I flew to Nashville and then ended up in Cookeville and drive up to this Church of Christ that I've never heard of in my life. And it's like every known way to help people that you could ever think of is there, from feeding people to giving people clothes to helping them rebuild. The church is, in a matter overnight, has turned into a big disaster relief center.
Sure.
You've got people who are, you walk less than a football field away from the church, and you've got houses destroyed and Christians that are just showing up and helping people just rebuild. And I've been to so many places like that with the Chronicle, with hurricanes and tornadoes and fires. I always leave that inspired because, we talked about some of the division we have in Churches of Christ, but there are also things that we do really well, and disaster relief is one of those. So, I mean, that would be one example of something where I'm just always inspired and feel good about being a member of Churches of Christ and being a Christian when I see that kind of response to people really, truly, and, in the worst situation they've ever encountered.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure you've been on the front lines in a lot of that. Is there a story that impacted you in such a way that maybe negatively, it may be the same as what you just said, but maybe negatively that it stuck with you, you couldn't shake? Something that you just like, wow, I had to report that, but I didn't like it.
Yeah, we've done some reporting on sexual abuse cases. So I ended up in Pennsylvania last year at a church where they had a youth minister. He was a volunteer youth minister, and he had done a lot of bad things with boys and teenagers for years.
Yeah.
It finally came out, and when it did come out, you had a lot of the church leaders obviously realized that a lot of boys had been hurt, a lot of families had been hurt, and rather than trying to do the right thing by those that had been hurt and those who had been victimized, they basically said, "You people need to forgive this guy and keep worshiping with him." I think the guy went forward and confessed to having done some unspecific wrong things, and these people were just supposed to move on and act like nothing had happened. And it's those kind of cases, and that situation is, there are other churches that have done the same thing, and so I mean that's in cases where you expect Christians to respond like Jesus would, like Christians would, when instead you see a cover up. Those kind of things probably leave me with a more negative view.
Absolutely. So when you look at journalism today, just across the board, just journalism in general, are you frustrated? Are you are we being sold a bill of goods in that, this whole fake news and everything else? I mean, is there integrity still in journalism, or has it become completely divided with partisan politics? I mean, what is it that you observe that frustrates you, and then maybe what you would applaud as well?
Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of Jekyll and Hyde on the media because I'll see people post on Facebook just the meanest, vilest things about the news media, like it's some strange entity that's not human.
Yes,
and I will be, I want to defend journalists because I've been at this 30 years, and in the first 15 years was in secular journalism, and I knew hundreds of journalists, and most were good people like you and me who were just trying to make their community better, trying
sure.
to report good things. So I'm defensive when I see that kind of thing, but at the same time I do see issues that frustrate me. I see a lot of media that reports with a broad brush, I would say, as far as quote conservative Christians or evangelicals, or I have a Google alert for evangelicals and religion or something like that, and there's two or three stories a day that the basic storyline is, why are evangelical Christians so stupid, and why do they support Donald Trump?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, on the one hand, I ask myself that sometimes, but on the other hand, it's deeper than that.
Sure.
There are issues that are at play there that go beyond maybe one character.
Yes.
So I mean, the whole fake news thing that's a politician trying to get votes.
Right.
I don't know how serious he is with the fake news thing. I think it plays well with his base.
Uh-huh.
But I also think the news media that is a lot of times so quick to defend themselves and say, "How dare you infringe on the freedom of the press? We're just trying to report the facts." Well, a lot of the facts and a lot of the slant that they're putting on it is from one side of the aisle, and not a complete thing. So I mean, life is complicated, and I think the whole media landscape is complicated. So I'm frustrated with everybody. Sometimes I don't know. So,
I'm with you on that. I mean, it's like, who can I be mad at today, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So how has that affected the Christian Chronicle, or has it? I mean, does the viewpoint that people have right now of the bad taste maybe in their mouth that they have of the media, has that affected the Christian Chronicle and y'all's reporting? To maybe people project those views upon you guys as well?
I think sometimes, and I think some people, their politics has become so much who they are, their partisanship on the right and the left, that it's almost like they view They view their Christianity through their political lens instead of viewing their politics through their Christianity.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
so we'll get some response that's like of a more partisan nature, and I think the other thing is we've allowed kind of the way that politics talks to influence how we talk to and about our Christian brothers and sisters rather than talking to them or trying to understand where they're coming from. We're quick to judge and have stereotypes as opposed to really having real conversations. So, I mean, I mentioned we've been covering the race issue, and obviously, and honestly been trying to really listen to our black brethren and understand where they're coming from, because in a lot of cases they're seeing what happened differently than maybe someone who's grown up as a white person like I have.
Sure.
And we're getting a lot of positive response to that, but we're also getting some negative response from people that
Sure.
I don't know. They come across as maybe racist and maybe don't even realize it with some of the concerns or questions that they raise. There's some legitimate questions and concerns too. I don't want to say everybody who doesn't agree with everything is racist, but there is some of that where makes me wonder.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually be on a podcast this week to talk about how Christians, can disagree effectively, because we hadn't always done real well with that. I mean, let's be honest. As Christians, we don't always disagree civilly. It's like we start the conversation up here and we start by labeling each other. And this has only made it worse, because what you said a while ago was a good way to put it. And I've always said, politics should our faith should shape our politics, not the other way around. And unfortunately, the disagreements are getting worse, and the vitriol is getting worse because you've added this politics into it that really has become an idol for a lot of Christians. And I don't think you can tell some folks that are so consumed with it that it is an idol for them. But you see that a lot now, as too many Christians have turned politics into an idol, and it's turning them into someone who is not letting their light shine, for sure. And I was curious as to what you saw about that. I appreciate that response. Let me ask you this. It's kind of shifting gears a little bit. How do you and your team decide what's newsworthy? I mean, what's the process of deciding, hey, I'm going to fly to wherever and cover this story?
Yeah, it's it's one of those things where some of it, I guess, is maybe a sixth sense or whatever. Just kind of, this is news and this is something we need to cover. I mean, we're trying to cover news that's important to Churches of Christ. So like with the tornadoes in Nashville, you had, when a tornado goes through a big chunk of Tennessee, Churches of Christ are going to be affected by that. And,
yes,
there were several members of Churches of Christ who lost homes or even lost their lives. So it's kind of the impact on Churches of Christ is part of it. Part of it is just kind of trying to, obviously in the USA, since George Floyd, the whole issue of race has been like a major point of discussion and unrest. So for us, we're trying to say, well, how does that impact Churches of Christ? What are members and leaders saying about that? So it's kind of, if there's big news in the country or the coronavirus, obviously it's affecting us. It's affecting every aspect of life, including our faith. And then that's obviously something we want to cover. Some of it's what are Christians talking about? What do they need to know? What would be just interesting? So it's just, there's no, I guess, we don't have like a checklist of check all this off and it's news. It's just kind of, this is interesting, this is important, this is something that we believe our readers either need or want to know about.
Sure. Have you ever investigated one of those where maybe you took a plane ride and you went somewhere to check it out and you're like, there's nothing here. This is not a story.
You want the honest answer?
Yeah, I want the honest answer.
Our budget is such that we better, generally, if we get on a plane, we better come back with a story.
You better come up with something, right?
Yeah, but honest, a lot of times, I mentioned I've been to 50 states. Sometimes I will have been, early when I was with the Chronicle, had an event in Maine where I went to a men's retreat at at a camp in Maine where I'd never been, and was able to go to some other New England states. So,
Sure.
there's times when maybe we'll go on a trip and we'll do 3 or 4 stories that we have in mind, and maybe there's something that doesn't pan out. But generally, if we get on a plane, we're going to come back with something,
Yeah.
just to, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, absolutely, and I think that's an interesting viewpoint that you put forth. That you visit a place where you can hit several spots, so you don't keep flying back and forth. You gather
Yeah.
stories. So when you're putting together these stories, when you're compiling things, how much of the reporting do you do, and how much does your team do? Being editor in chief, I'm sure you have the final say in everything, but how much of the work do you actually put in as far as on a weekly basis? How many stories are you writing? How much are you putting forth yourself?
Yeah, we're a real small staff. We've got Eric Trigestad, who is the president and CEO,
Uh-huh.
and also he covered international news for, well, I guess 20 years now. So he's moved more into the fundraising, public relations side,
Gotcha.
but still does a lot of reporting with international news. I'm still the lead writer on the national news. We have Shelley Eisen is our digital news editor, and she does a lot of reporting as well. And then we have several freelancers, but it's a small staff. So I'm doing editing, I'm doing writing. We're just, I think we do a lot for having such a small staff.
Yeah, seems like
I had texted Eric and Shelley today and said, I wish we had more than one of each of us, because we could get, because there's so much that I'm trying to get to that I haven't, just because we've got so much going on and so few people.
Absolutely.
But I will generally write 1 or 2 major pieces a month for the print edition. I write a column for Page 3 every month, and then I do I assign stories, either where we've got people closer to the scene, or it's something I can't get to that I will assign out.
Yeah.
I try to, if it's something really sensitive that I feel like it needs, or important, where I feel like it needs my 30 years of whatever expertise I have, I will generally try to take a larger role in that. If it's something, we've had interns and we've had younger reporters who help us. If it's something where it's just a matter of a few interviews and pretty much anybody with any level of experience could do, a lot of times I will assign those out rather than doing it myself, just because I feel like my time might be better spent elsewhere.
Sure. So I guess when you're putting together a story too, or when you're putting together the paper, your years of service probably matters too. Putting your name beneath a story probably does matter. I know you don't want to say that, but that probably does matter. And so that probably goes into the selection process too, doesn't it? I mean, a little bit.
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think Eric and I both have been doing this long enough that people do tend to recognize our name if we're the one that contacts you or asked to write about something. So I think that does help. And the other thing I would add about what we do is, even in the time I've been at the Chronicle, we, the digital first idea, we're going to publish this now rather than waiting for a print deadline, or we're going to do a YouTube video. We're doing a lot of that kind of thing and still doing the print edition. We've added Shelley, who really helps on the digital side, but it's, we're kind of like all of journalism right now. Everybody's doing a whole lot more with not necessarily more resources or more time to do it.
Yeah, and that was my next question, actually. I'm glad you said that, because how different is it now in this digital age? Because everybody wants news right now. They don't want to wait a week or a month for a paper to come out. How much of your audience is waiting on that paper copy? How much of those are you printing, and what's the traction like on social media? I would think that the media, the internet, delivery is probably a lot more views than the paper, right?
In some ways, I think especially younger audiences are more likely to read it online, to see it on Twitter or Facebook.
Yeah.
But we do have some older readers who are on Facebook. But we mail the print edition to 135,000 individual addresses. That would be households and
Okay.
some churches that get it at the church. And we don't. Most of what we write online would not come anywhere close to 135,000 page views. I mean, we've had a few on bigger news, but
Yeah.
but a lot of people really do see still the paper that comes in the mail is still how they read what we do. It's still how
Yeah.
a lot of people, and honestly, we would love to get more people reading it in real time. And I was talking to one guy last week, and he said all this stuff happened with George Floyd, and he said, I wondered where the Brotherhood was on this. So, I get the paper in the mail, but I decided to get on your website. And he said, I was surprised to see all that you already had up there. So,
Right.
I think we would love for people, if there is big news, to kind of be checking our website and see if there is something out there live that we've already reported, rather than waiting however long it takes to get it in the mail every month.
So there is no plans right now to move away from paper and just be strictly online, at least not now.
Not right now. No, it's too. I mean, it's still too important a part of what we do, and we love as long as people want to get it in the mail and want to support it. I guess the issue is a lot of the people who do prefer it are 20 years from now may be either a lot older or not here. So some of that may be generational as far as how long the print product lasts, but right now we're still doing it, and it's still kind of our flagship, what we do. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I mean, 135,000, that's a really good circulation, I would think. And then, like you said, news is so instantaneous now. I mean, I know you guys did a story not long ago on churches responding to the COVID pandemic and, opening back up and all that. And we were one of the churches that you talked about. And so I wanted to see, kind of what was going on. And I'm just a digital person. I don't wait for a paper. I just go and it really is neat to see how you guys have adapted and adjusted so well to putting that stuff online and making it available in so many different forums, in the digital aspect of things. And I really appreciated that. That was great. But I want to ask you this, as we kind of wrap things up, I want to ask you, what advice would you give to somebody who was maybe thinking about a career in journalism? And it may not just be one thing, but what would you tell them?
I would my first thing would be run for your life. I have 3 kids, and one went into ministry, and my middle son just graduated from Oklahoma Christian, and he majored in journalism.
Okay.
Which we were very excited about, but given the state of the economy and the state of the industry, we were also very worried whether he would get a job, and he was blessed. He's working at a news organization called Oklahoma Watch now, and actually he got assigned to go cover Trump's rally in Tulsa last weekend.
Okay.
We all got to do coronavirus tests as a result of that. We bagged it. Good news.
Good news. Yes, for sure.
But back to your question. Honestly, I would tell them that it is a hard profession right now to break into, because the economics are such that, with the print media, it's just people online. We haven't figured out how to make the same level of income, and there's been so much people are not used to paying for content online, and they don't realize that journalism costs money. So it is a hard profession to break into. So it's a great thing to do, but you have to really want to do it. It's probably like ministry. If you can do anything else and be happy, maybe you should. But if you feel like in your heart journalism is calling me and this is what I want to do with my life, then I would just say, study hard, enjoy talking to people, try to be fair, be on the lookout constantly for good stories, and it'll be an amazing career for you.
Awesome. Now tell us about how can people donate to the Christian Chronicle?
How can they donate? ChristianChronicle.org/donate.
Okay. ChristianChronicle.org/donate. And you guys really rely on that to keep the circulation going. So if you love the Christian Chronicle, then go ahead and make a donation. Make sure that we keep this thing going. I personally really enjoy it. I appreciate all that you do and your staff does. I've got some copies here. So people, wonder, what is the Christian Chronicle? I doubt many do, but if they do, this is what it is. You can go online and check it out as well. Bobby and staff do a great job, and I just thank you so much for joining me. I'm glad the COVID tests were negative too. I saw that on social media, and
thank you.
So that's a good thing. And I want to tell our viewers and or listeners that if they have any questions for me or Bobby, we'll make sure that he gets those questions. It's chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. You can email me, and like I said, if you have a specific question for Bobby in journalism or anything like that, we can pass that on to him, and I'm sure he'd be glad to answer those. And we just appreciate you tuning in. Remember to spread the word about the podcast. We're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, YouTube, of course, Facebook, and we just would appreciate you spreading the news about us. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you sincerely, Chris.